Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to all respected attendees and speakers. Welcome to the online continuing professional development for Nusantara. This is the first webinar of the second strand of the event. This event is a collaboration between the British Council and Peltin. It is with a huge gratitude towards the British Council and Peltin for making this event possible. It is a pleasure that I, Dimas Pujianto, will serve as the Master of Ceremony for today's webinar entitled Translanguaging in Teaching English to Young Learners. A heartfelt and warm welcome is extended to our speakers for today's webinar, Bapak Subhan Zein, Ph.D., the Adjunct Professor of Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Good morning and welcome, Pak Subhan.
Good morning.
Also to Ibu Nicke Yunita Moecharam, MA, from Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia and from the Publications Division of Peltin. Good morning and welcome, Ibu Nicke.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dimas.
Today's webinar is hosted by a moderator, Dr. Diah Royani Meisani from Universitas Brawijaya, who is also the head of research and development of Peltin. Dear participants, there are a few things we would like to inform you. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded on British Council's Indonesia YouTube page. By attending, you acknowledge that your comments may be recorded and rebroadcasted. If you would like to ask questions, please type them in the Q&A box on Zoom. At the end of this session, you will be given a link to complete a post-event survey. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the Chief Committee of the event, Dr. Diah Royani Meisani, to deliver a speech. To Dr. Diah Meisani, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Dimas. Well, good morning and Assalamualaikum Bapak Ibu. As always on this lovely Saturday, I'm delighted to welcome you to Strand 2 with the theme Knowing the Subject, where today we delve into the intriguing topic of webinar 4, which is Translanguaging in Teaching English to Young Learners, born out of collaboration between British Council and Peltin. Like the previous series, we have an exciting session planned with distinguished experts in the field. But before we proceed, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all participants who joined us from Strand 1. Your presence and engagement in our previous webinars have been instrumental in creating a vibrant learning community. We are honored to have two esteemed panelists today, experts who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the event. Please join me in welcoming Bapak Subhan Zein, Ph.D. and Ibu Nicke Yunita Moecharam, Master of Arts. Thank you, Pak Subhan and Bu Nicke, for being our speakers today. Their expertise in linguistic and language education will provide valuable insights into the practice of translanguaging in teaching English to young learners. And last but not least, I encourage all of you to join our community of practice and consider becoming a Peltin member. It's a great way to stay connected, share ideas, and continue your professional development journey. Once again, thank you, Bapak Ibu, for being here today. Let's make this webinar an interactive and collaborative experience. Before I give it back to MC, let's deliver the Peltin slogan with gesture, of course, yeah. I would like to invite the host and panelists to unmute and do it together. Okay. So, Peltin, grow together,
grow better.
grow better. Thank you very much. Give it back to you. MC, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Diah. Now let's welcome and listen to the opening speech by the first Vice President of Peltin, Ibu Yusnita Febrianti, Ph.D., who will also officially mark the commencement of the event. To Ibu Yusnita, the screen is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
A very good morning, everyone. Saying hello to you all from a very bright morning here in Malang. It is an honor for me to be here and welcome you all to another session of our sharing, the online continuing professional development for Nusantara. Again, we would like to remind you how grateful we are for the support from the British Council to continue to be able to serve the community of primary English language teachers in Indonesia through the webinar series like this. Webinar series like this is probably small for the many problems, the issues that we have in our schools, in the complicated or complex issues that we handle every day in the classrooms of SD, SMP, all across Indonesia. And we are grateful for our keynote speakers that contribute their time to support us for the dissemination of knowledge, theories, and skills that we hope to be able to apply and implement in our classroom. It is also a chance for us, everyone, to share, again, the issues that we have in the classroom so that we can talk about it, we can share about it, and then together we will find solutions. Together we will be filling each other's gaps so that we can learn from the experts, from our fellow teachers, from the people who teach at the primary schools in the SD and SMP level. We hope that we have a fruitful knowledge and session from today's webinar. We hope that you would continue to commit and join our next webinar every Saturday until March. We are very happy to have you here with us and enjoy the webinar today. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Ibu Yusnita. That marks the commencement of the event. Now we will proceed to the webinar, and I would like to invite Dr. Diah Royani Meisani as the moderator to host the webinar. To Ibu Diah, the stage is yours.
Thank you and hello again, Bapak Ibu. I'm delighted to be here today as the moderator, and it's truly a pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelist, Bapak Subhan Zein, Ph.D. Your presence here is truly an honor. Personally, I must express my deep admiration for your exceptional contributions to the field of teaching English to young learners. Pak Subhan has not only shaped the discourse in PYL, but his work has also played a significant role in informing and inspiring my own research. Now, please allow me to read the CV of Pak Subhan. So, Bapak Subhan Zein, Ph.D. is a visiting professor at Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. He has taught at a number of institutions in Indonesia and Australia, including Australian National University, Trinity College, the University of Melbourne, and the University of Queensland. His referred publications include 11 books and numerous book chapters and articles. He is the sole author of 3 monographs, Language Policy in Super Diverse Indonesia by Routledge 2020, English as a Subject in Basic Education in ASEAN, a comparative study by British Council in 2022, and Country Profiles, English as a Subject in Basic Education in Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Philippines, Thailand and Vietnam, Recommendations for Policy and Research by British Council, again, 2022. His 3 other monographs are forthcoming with the British Council. He is editor and lead editor of 5 academic volumes, including Early Language Learning Policy in the 21st Century, An International Perspective by Springer, 2021, and Early Language Learning and Teacher Education, International Research and Practice, Multilingual Matters, 2019. And it's not finished yet. He is Asia Travel Book Series Editor-in-Chief and is Australia's best researchers in English language and literature for 2 years running, 2021 and 2022. Having taught students from 90 countries, he has been invited to deliver feature, plenary, and keynote speeches, as well as public lectures in countries including Brazil, Colombia, Georgia, England, Indonesia, the Philippines, among others. His works have appeared in revered journals including Language Teaching, Professional Development in Education, Journal of Education for Teaching, International Research and Pedagogy, International Journal of Bilingualism, and Bilingual Education and Applied Linguistic Review. Bapak Ibu, now please join me in welcoming Dr. Subhan Zein to deliver the first presentation. To Bapak Subhan, time is yours.
Thank you, Diah. May I share my screen?
Yes, please, Bapak.
Okay, so this is the screen. Can everyone see it?
Yes, we can see it, Pak.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning to everyone. To my presentation, it's Pedagogical Translanguaging for Primary English Teachers. This is the overview of my presentation. The first one is about the origin of translanguaging. The second one is I would like to talk about the extended concept of translanguaging. And then in the third section, I will be talking about pedagogical translanguaging, and then translanguaging in the primary English classroom, and then the conclusion and references. So the origin, what is translanguaging basically? The origin of translanguaging comes from the Welsh language. So the word is Trausiaethu. It was coined by a Ph.D. student at that time named Ken Williams. And at that time, he was working on a Ph.D. thesis describing a teaching method adopted in bilingual secondary schools in Wales. So the idea is quite simple, basically. And upon reflection, I myself and a few of my colleagues actually implemented this, without actually knowing what it was called. So the idea is simple. It involves providing students with information in one language or presenting information in one language and then asking them to do the production process, asking them to produce a piece of written or oral work in another language. So one example in this case is to ask students to prepare a poster in English and then to explain it in Welsh. So a few of the primary English teachers whom I have met recently in the Philippines and also Indonesia, they also said that, yeah, I did that, I did this, but I didn't know that it is actually translanguaging. So it's quite funny when we think about it. What are the features of translanguaging? Translanguaging has got many features that characterize its implementation, especially when it comes to pedagogy. The first one is that translanguaging enables students to internalize new knowledge, to process it, and then to make sense of it in the other language. So there's a language acquisition process involved in this context. The second one is that two languages in translanguaging are used in a structured way. So there's got to be a structure, and this structure is needed in order to organize and facilitate mental processes in learning. Translanguaging itself is not just a structure, however, because translanguaging actually involves and it requires a number of cognitive skills. These cognitive skills are both receptive and expressive, or in other words, receptive and productive. So for example, metacognitive skills such as noticing are very important in translanguaging, because without noticing, then teachers or students wouldn't be able to apply translanguaging perfectly. Teachers in particular, they really need to know a particular area that needs translanguaging in their teaching. And I will talk about it when I discuss scaffolding. Translanguaging, however, as a concept has been extended not only in terms of pedagogy, but also in terms of linguistics, right? Ideology and discourse. So let's get into them one by one. The whole idea of translanguaging now is about whole linguistic repertoire. In translanguaging, there are no linguistic borders. Languages are not separated. Languages are not compartmentalized. So if you look at the picture on the right, then this is the kind of representation that we have in structuralist linguistics, where we have languages being compartmentalized or separated in the brain. So that's why we have different parts of the brain that are responsible for different languages. So one part is responsible for Arabic, another one for Indonesian, another one for English, another one probably for Javanese, Sundanese, or whatever indigenous language that you speak. So this is the whole idea of structuralist linguistics. All our languages are separated, all languages have border. However, translanguaging does not work like that, because in translanguaging, there are no linguistic borders. So as you can see in the left image, this is an image that represents translanguaging, because languages in here are considered as one part of whole linguistic repertoire. There are no borders. There is no separation between Arabic and Indonesian and English and any other languages. In other words, there are no linguistic borders. The second one is that translanguaging is against fixity of languages. By fixity of languages, that means languages actually are not fixed. They evolve, they change, they are dynamic, and they change over time. English that we are speaking now, that's a different kind of English from the time of William Shakespeare. It is a different kind of English from the time of Charles Dickens or Nathaniel Hawthorne. Why? Because English evolves. Like any other languages, English evolves. English changes over time. And for that reason, when it comes to language use in society and among people, then we have fluid and mobile language use, right? In other words, there is no particular rule that sets that one part of language or one variety of language must be implemented in one area when it comes to communication, because everything is fluid and everything is mobile. Somebody can communicate using features of English in addition to Mandarin, for example, or in addition to Japanese or Thai. So the extension of the concept also means that translanguaging is not the same. It's not the same with code switching or code mixing. Practically, yes, they are the same, because we are just about switching features of languages, mixing features of languages, and so on. That's in terms of practice. But in terms of ideology, they are totally different, because translanguaging is about the deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire. And in doing so, according to Professor Charles Otagoy, Ophelia Garcia, and Reid, translanguaging does not pay any regard for adherence to the socially and politically defined boundaries of named languages. So whether it is called Indonesian or English or Arabic, it doesn't matter, because this idea of Indonesian, Arabic, and English, this idea is just basically an ideological construction based on social conventions, based on political rules. So that's why we have the difference between Indonesian and Malaysian, right? We call it Bahasa Indonesia, and there they call it Bahasa Malaysia, okay? So in other words, the Indonesian language and the Malaysian language, when in fact, there are two dialects of the same linguistic variety, which is Malay. So there you go. Whether it is called Danish or Swedish, excuse me, these are basically just social conventions, when in fact they are dialects of the same linguistic variety. And the extension of the concept also means that we have a discourse-based understanding of translanguaging. What does it mean by discourse-based understanding of translanguaging? This means that the entire linguistic repertoire of bilingual people, right, works when they adjust their fluid discourse to different contexts, socially, culturally, and politically. So the way you translanguage would be very much evidenced by would be very much based on the different contexts in which you are involved in. You may translanguage in a different way when you talk to your mother, right? From the way you talk with your friends. If you use translanguaging, in the way you talk to your friends when you're actually talking to your mother, then that would be totally weird, right? That would be usually socially unacceptable. So different social contexts, different cultural and political contexts, this shape the way translanguaging is employed. Excuse me. Now we talk about pedagogical translanguaging. And I'm going to show you some examples based on the research of Professor Ophelia Garcia and Professor Li Wei. So this is based on their book. So the first one example here is given, an example of translanguaging. Here a teacher introduces 2 or 3 key vocabulary words and their definitions at the beginning of the lesson. And then after that, the teacher asks the students to translate the definition into their home languages. So that's one example. The second example is when the teacher has students listen to a song in Spanish about the topic of the day. And then the students must answer a series of questions about the song in English. So that's actually a variation of the original translanguaging that Ken Williams implemented in 1994 in his PhD thesis. The third one is when a teacher has students look at a series of pictures and ask students to discuss in small groups what they see and what they can infer. In doing so, they can discuss in any language they wish. However, they are asked to share with the whole class in English. So the process of discussion, the process of sharing with their classmates, that's the time when the students translanguage. However, many teachers in different contexts around the world, and this has been proven by several research studies, they misconstrue translanguaging because they conflate translanguaging with translation. They think that translation is translanguaging, when in fact there are 2 different concepts and there are 2 different pedagogical practices. How come? Let's see at these 3 examples. These 3 examples are not translanguaging. One more time, they are not translanguaging. So one example is this one. The teacher speaks in English and then translates what she just said into Spanish after every few sentences. In fact, this is the most common pedagogical practice the most common pedagogical practice in different contexts around the world. I talked to my students from Taiwan, Vietnam, and China. They said that, yes, when I was a teacher, I did this. My students from Brazil, from Germany, they also said the same thing, as well as prospective teachers from Russia, France, and Ukraine. They also do the same thing. Indonesian teachers, yes, they do the same thing. So they do it in English, and then after that, they do the translation into Indonesian, into Tagalog, into Malaysian, into Chinese Mandarin, whatever languages they speak. So there you go. That's not translanguaging. The second one is that a teacher does a word-for-word translation of a text and tells students to either read the English text or the text in their home language. And when they do that, the students choose to read the home language only or the English only text. So that's just a variation of translation, and that's not translanguaging. The third example that also embodies not translanguaging pedagogy is this one, when students are given a reading that is chunked into paragraphs. The paragraphs alternate between one in English and an exact translation in their home language. So there you go. This is not translanguaging either. Now, what about translanguaging pedagogy? When we have translanguaging pedagogy, we need to have teacher design of curriculum and classroom structures that work in alignment. In other words, what we do in the curriculum needs to align with the kind of classroom structures that we do in the, when we deal with our students. However, because this is new, I don't think that we have seen many curricula or syllabi using translanguaging in practice. Yeah, in fact, I have looked at different course profiles or modules in different universities in England, in the United States, and Australia. I haven't seen course profiles focusing on the curriculum thematic units of translanguaging, which is why I then developed a new one called Translanguaging in the ESOL classroom for the University of New South Wales. And the idea is that we have curriculum thematic units in order to integrate ways of languaging and producing knowledge. When we do that, then we know the kind of language that we are going to introduce to the students in the classroom, how this language, is integrated, is perceived, right, and internalized, and then is utilized for production. And this needs to go in integration. I can show you the course profile later on. I will share it with the curriculum organizer. So if you are interested, then you may have a look at it and you may use it for your own benefit. So that's curriculum thematic units. The second one is research task. Research task is a kind of classroom structure that is useful in the classroom so that students can translanguage as they find new information. So one simple idea would be like this. When you teach your students, you ask them to find information in Indonesian, and then after that to ask them to do a simple presentation in their group, right, in English. So when they do that, they do a research task, or this research task could be part of a project-based learning, which I'm going to talk about later. The second one is language inquiry task, and this language inquiry task consists of different things such as cross-linguistic comparisons that include cognate identification. So for example, we have the word computer in Indonesian. So computer is, of course, is a borrowed word from English. So computer and computer, these are cognates, right? So we ask the students to see the difference in spelling and the difference in pronunciation of these two words coming from Indonesian and English. And then after that, they could see, there's the cross-linguistic comparison. In Indonesian, we need ka. In English, we need ke. So that's the difference, computer and computer. And we can do that with many different words, of course. And then language inquiry task is also important to build translanguaging capacities and to extend metalinguistic awareness. And then the third one that we can use is peer and group tasks according to home language. And we do that in order to enable collaborative dialogue and cooperative tasks using translanguaging. How do we do that? Basically, it's very simple. We can group students based on their home language. So some students speaking Sundanese, they could work together, right? Other students having Javanese as the first language, they could work together. And in doing so, they can collaborate, they could discuss and share ideas using their home language and switch between their home language and English. The third one is a project-based learning. This is a new concept that is in emergence in the United States, and it has been adopted in the TESOL education landscape, where we have project-based learning in TESOL. By project-based learning, that basically is a culmination of many different things. So you have the research task, you have the peer task and group task involved, and then after that you ask students to work on a project where they can, in the end, produce a written work or a presentation, right? So they could present on something, or they could present a proposal, or they could write a piece of proposal about something. So when they do that, they extend on the foundational skills developed previously. Now, how do we actually implement translanguaging in the primary English classroom? Translanguaging has got many benefits. It has the potential to enable a deeper understanding of the subject taught, because students must have understood the meaning of a given topic at a deep, detailed level. And then it encourages school-home interaction, with parents being able to support the children's work. So the work of the parents will help the work of the teacher in school. The third one is that translanguaging improves children's knowledge of the second language and develops their overall learning. Specifically, there are many ideas to implement this, and multimodality, as one of the resources that's provided by the British Council, has been proven as a vehicle to learn languages. And multimodality, I would say, is one of the most important strategy for translanguaging. What is multimodality? It is basically various opportunities to learn languages through different models. So that range from learning via sound, image, and body language to using multimodal forms of conveying meaning in online platforms, including memes, emojis, photographs, etc. If you look at this YouTube, then you will find an example of using multimodality where children could learn English by watching Japanese anime. I don't think I will have time to cover this, so I'll just leave it up to you to watch it at your leisure. And then the next one is translanguaging as and for scaffolding. Scaffolding, the idea of scaffolding is simple, but the implementation is very difficult. By this, I mean translanguaging is the use of features of the L1 or L2 in one level beyond learner's current level. And the use of features of the L1 and L2 are meant to aid comprehension, to do recasts, to give oral feedback, to simplify explanation, and so on. So here's an example that I have also presented, excuse me, in different occasions. This comes from my research in 2018, when a teacher from Java uses translanguaging to explain the concept of kota besar and kota kecil. And if you look at the excerpt carefully, you will find that the teacher not only just translates, but the teacher elicits information. The teacher invites students to translanguage, and in this one in particular, where's the I cannot use the arrow somehow. So the one that says, so I live small city, right? Gesturing with finger, apa yang kurang di, that's when the teacher basically says that, okay, we're missing preposition here. D, oh, D is in, right? So Miss Rosa says correct. So the sentence, I live in small city. So this is a kind of elicitation process where translanguaging is involved in a scaffolding manner. And then after that, right, the teacher also says, okay, still we have something missing. When the teacher writes down, I live in small city, of course we miss an article in there. And then one student notices that, oh, the article is missing and the article is A. So the student says, and miss, yes, very good. So say it together, everyone. I live in a small city. I live in a small city. I live in a small city. That's the drilling part. And then the teacher asks again, artinya, the meaning, saya tinggal di kota kecil. Very good. And then the teacher asks the students to translanguage in Javanese. Okay, in Javanese, Sekar. This is the name of a student. Okay, kulo uripe nang kota cilik, miss. So that's the translanguaging process. It's basically a translation, right? But because of the scaffolding process, it is not just a simple translation, because in this case, the translation basically becomes translanguaging because of the involvement, because of the structure that shows scaffolding in the process. And then now we go on into the three elements of translanguaging which I have conceptualized, and the first one is purposeful translanguaging. What is the purpose of translanguaging? This is the big question that every teacher that teaches in a home language context needs to think about. The first one is to be aligned with lesson plans, right? So translanguaging can be used for classroom management, for managing students' behavior, for recast, for explaining concepts, right? And to repair, okay? These are all parts of the lesson plan. So you can, when you plan your lessons, think about, right, how you are going to use your translanguaging. Is it to manage the classroom? Is it to explain concepts? Or is it to simply repair something, when students don't understand something? So in other words, when we do that, we do it in a very structural manner. However, teaching is not always structural, because teaching in most situations is incidental. So as a teacher, we need to be vigilant of classroom events and be responsive to them. But by that, I mean classroom events are actually what determine how the classroom is working, what the teacher does and what the students do, and how the teacher responds to what they do. So that's why classroom events shape how our pedagogy could work. And in fact, in most of the situation, translanguaging works based on classroom events. So we need to be vigilant of them. We need to think about, okay, in this kind of situation, do I need translanguaging or I don't need translanguaging, which leads to our next point, which is judicious translanguaging. So that's based on the second resource in the British Council link that I can provide you at the reference list. This is when teachers decide when to use learners' first home language based on a couple of criteria. The first one, the language pairing options in the classroom, and then their awareness of how additional language learners obtain language development, language knowledge from their environment. And then the second is when teachers decide when to focus on language based on the extent of their knowledge of language development and teaching across the age groups. Teaching students in grade 1, who are around 6 or 7 years old, and teaching students in grade 2 who are in between 7 and 8 years old. So we need to know the kind of language development, involved with these different age groups. And then we can understand the extent of their language development and in what way we can translanguage appropriately when we teach this kind of students. And then the second one is whether and how English features in the learners' home language use. To what extent the learners actually use the home language? Are they the kind of learners who use the home language frequently with their parents or not? And then we also need to know the kind of exposure, the level of exposure that they have to English outside of school environment. So for example, through technology and the media. Now, strategic translanguaging. Bear in mind that exposure to the target language, in this case English, is fundamental. Translanguaging is just a tool, right? So not just because translanguaging is trending in applied linguistics and TESOL education at the moment, it doesn't mean that you have to do it all the time, because not all classroom procedures require translanguaging. Every purposeful translanguaging has strategies, right? But not all strategies have been unraveled. So I have looked at around 100 to 200 papers in Q1, Q2 journals around the world, and I haven't found all strategies for different purposeful translanguaging. Translanguaging as an area of research is ripe for exploration. So which means that we as teachers know too little, right? From what we can potentially do in the classroom to use translanguaging effectively. And the other thing we need to bear in mind is that some translanguaging strategies may work at one classroom event, but not at others. And the last bit would be, if we would like to be strategic with our translanguaging, we don't have to do it all the time. Sometimes we can assign students, right? We can utilize them, and some of them may do a very good job at Translanguaging. So there you go. Now the conclusion is that Translanguaging caters for a wide range of learners, right? Their needs in the use of L1 and L2. And in Translanguaging, we need to exploit multimodality, the use of photos, the use of sounds, videos, anime, and so on. These are multimodal practices, right, that can be employed in the classroom and that can help us to implement Translanguaging effectively. The third one is that we need to maximize Translanguaging for scaffolding, and this is also an issue of research that is ripe for exploration. So if you are interested in exploring Translanguaging, this would be my main recommendation to explore. The fourth one is that Translanguaging in principle needs to be purposeful, it needs to be judicious, and it needs to be strategic. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. And if you are interested in exploring more, then this is the list of references that I've been using. And you can take a look at these two important resources that have been published by the British Council. The links are available here. Thank you very much for your attention. And I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Pak Subhan. It's very insightful. I agree with you, Pak Subhan. We may have implemented translanguaging in our classes, but we are not aware that we have yet. And providing students with more than one languages in our class, why not? Of course, many of us just apply this. And practically, it's just the same as code switching and code mixing, or we have been familiar with these two concepts, code switching and code mixing, but in fact they're not the same. Okay, so we have got some questions. Subhan, can we start?
Yes, I can see some questions. A question in there that I can answer.
Yeah. Okay. So I will read the first questions from Ibu Anissa Nurul Ilmi. First question: can you explain again the difference between translanguaging, code switching, and code mixing? Just what I have said. Perhaps you can give the illustration or example of each phenomena. I've read some sources about them, but cannot get the point clearly. I think Pak Subhan have just given the cases.
Sorry,
the Japanese teacher.
I'm sorry. Is that a question from the webinar chat?
Yes.
Which one is it? I can't say.
The first one, Ibu Anissa Nurul Ilmi. QA. QA. You may open the QA box, Pak Subhan.
QA box.
Yes.
I can see Anissa Nurul Ilmi, but I cannot see the question. I can see the comment.
So it's not on the chat box, but in the QA box. It's different. Can you find it?
Sorry, I cannot find it. Can you please copy that and then put it?
Oh, sure. Sure, hopefully. I can copy it on the chat.
I can see a question here in the webinar chat.
I have copied
from Ibu Rika Ristiana Dewi, which I can answer, which I can answer as well. Which one do you want me to answer first? From Ibu Rika or from Ibu
Anissa first.
From Anissa. Okay.
Yes, I have copied it. Can you explain again the difference between TL? And then why do you think of applying translanguaging in a speaking class of English department for the first year students? How can I deal with translanguaging to facilitate students' learning? Okay, please pass on.
All right. I think there are two questions in here. Yeah. And then the second question from Ibu Anissa is basically quite similar to what Ibu Rika has said about the ideal percentage of using translanguaging in a classroom, right? It's quite similar in a way that that question would lead to this question. So I'm going to give an idea to that as well. So the first one, the difference between translanguaging, code switching, and code mixing, as I said earlier, in practice, that's just what people do. It's the multilingual term, according to Professor Stephen May, right? But according to Professor Sationo Sugiharto, interestingly, there is no multilingual term. because in Indonesia, in India, in Nigeria, China, and everywhere, people do it all the time, right? It's either whether it is called translanguaging or code mixing or code switching, that's basically what people do in practice, you know? So practically they are the same, all right? Psychologically, okay, psychologically, however, they are different. Ideologically, they are also different. Why psychologically they are different? Because in the brain, you do not assign your brain to say that, okay, in minute 20, in minute 1, and in the 20th second, I will say something in Swedish. And then after that, I will use 2 words from Bengali. And then I will mix those words, you know, with some sentences in English. You do not assign your brain like that. Our brain doesn't work like that. So psycholinguistically, you know, they are different. But in structuralist linguistics, they believe that they are different because our brain has got different compartments that are responsible for different languages, when in fact studies in cognitive bilingualism have proven that that's not entirely true. So it is kind of arguable, you know, but I'm more inclined to say that psycholinguistically they are not the same. And then ideologically, they are not the same either, right? They are totally different because in terms of ideology, you know, everything that you call languages, you know, they are basically based on social conventions. They are based on political rules, you know. So when you say that, when you say that Indonesian is different from Malaysia, it's an ideological question. It's an ideological statement. Why? Because we would like to be different. In the beginning, yes, we had real. If you read the history of Malay, then you will learn that the Indonesian language comes from the Riau dialect of Malay, right? The Malay language, however, does not come from the Riau dialect. It comes from its branch. It's called the Johor Riau Malay, which now has become the Malay language. I have discussed this in my book, Language Policy in Super Diverse in Indonesia. So if you are interested, have a look at it. So the idea about this is that because of the difference in ideology, right? At that time, there were some kind of political struggle involved, you know, among members of the court, you know, in the Riau Sultanate, right? Where the British and the Dutch also wanted to get involved. They wanted to separate the Malay people speaking the Johor dialect and the Indonesian people speaking the Riau dialect. So for that reason, then we have the Indonesian language coming from the Riau dialect, whereas the Malaysian people, they have the Malaysian language coming from the Johor dialect. So there is an ideological process involved, and there is also a political process involved, right? And when they do that, then you mix them around, okay, then ideologically and politically, they are different according to structuralist linguistics, okay? But according to this whole repertoire perspective, they are not different, okay? They are basically the same. We just call them different. Why? Because we need social convention. This social convention will reflect our identity. It will tell us who we are, whether we are Indonesian or we are Malaysian. Does that make sense? Yeah. So ideologically, they are different. Politically, they are different. All right. In practice, they are the same. Okay. So, hang on. So from Ibu Rizka, yeah. What is the ideal percentage of using translanguaging in the classroom, and why do you think applying target language in a speaking class of English department for the first year of the students? Okay, in what way we differentiate this, whether it is students at the beginners level, pre-intermediate level, intermediate level, advanced level? How do we do that? I had a similar question when I gave a presentation at Santo Tomas University in December from a professor there. It was a very challenging question, and I was put on the spot. and it got me to think about it. And then I came up with an idea that's called Translanguaging Continuum, right? By Translanguaging Continuum, I haven't really written about it, but I have this concept in mind. The idea is simple. When you have different levels from the lowest to the highest, okay, translanguaging works in the opposite, all right? The more translanguaging you need is at the lowest level. At the highest level, you don't really need translanguaging. So the role of the teacher is more needed, in the primary classroom, with students of young, with teachers of young learners, right? When the teacher teaches young learners. But at the higher level, the teacher does not really need translanguaging. So in that case, what is the purpose of translanguaging? Does translanguaging still have a purpose? Yes, it does. It is not the teacher that uses translanguaging, but the teacher that facilitates translanguaging amongst the students. By doing what? By doing group discussion, research activities, by asking them to complete project-based learning. So when they do that, the teacher does not do so much of translanguaging, but the students do it more, right? So the higher the level, the lower translanguaging is needed. That's the idea of translanguaging continuum. Because when you teach students in primary schools, the students need more exposure, right? They need more help, And where do they get the help from? From the home language that's used by the teacher, right? When the teacher translanguages. So there you go. But students in the primary classroom, they need more exposure. But students at higher levels, they don't need more exposure. They don't need so much reception. They need more production. And this is the time when they do the translanguaging. The students in the primary classroom, they don't do a lot of translanguaging because they receive the translanguaging from the teacher. So that's how it works. What about the percentage? I think it all depends on the context. Teaching is not mathematics, okay? Teaching is not mathematics. Whether you cannot say for exactly the amount of language you'll be using in the classroom, whether it's going to be 20% in the home language and then 80% in English or vice versa. You cannot really do that, right? In fact, the definition of exposure in the target language varies from one context to another. And that's the conclusion that's been given by prominent scholars, such as Professor Jack Richards and Professor David Noonan, in some of their presentations a few years back in Asia TEFL conferences. So there you go. I hope that answers your question, Ibu Anissa and Ibu Rika, yeah?
Okay, hopefully yes, Pak Subhan. Okay, so in brief, actually, there is no exact portion of translanguaging we use in our class, yeah? Just maximize it for scaffolding, for group discussion, project-based learning, and others. Just like
yes, that's right. The bottom line used in here is that the teacher needs to be really judicious. They need to think all the time, do I really need to translanguage here or not? Can I involve the students? If I involve the students, which one, right? Do I involve everybody, or do I get the strongest student to help the others, and so on? They have to be judicious. Teacher is a cognitive process as much as it is an emotional process. And by doing that, then the teacher will need to think carefully about the kind of strategy that they'll be using for different classroom incidents. Mind you that one classroom incident will require translanguaging strategies. It may not just be one translanguaging strategy. It may be a lot more, okay? That's why I said earlier that from the many research about translanguaging we've got so far, translanguaging strategies for different classroom incidents have not been explored much. So it's still a huge challenge for both researchers, scholars, and teachers.
All right, thank you, Pak Subhan, for the very comprehensive answers. And we still have so many questions here. Please let me answer the next one from Buyanti Wijaya. It's on the QA box. Does it mean this translanguaging will boost globalization?
Oh,
Can
Q&A, so it's in here. Sorry, now I
no.
can find it. Previous,
Okay,
I
great.
couldn't find it. Okay. Ibu Yanti Wijaya
Yes. Mhm.
will boost localization. We can also
Mhm.
lessen students' anxiety. I think
About
translanguaging is
using.
one of our best.
Mhm.
Yes. Boost localization. There's a question that's actually the opposite of this in my previous presentation. Will translanguaging actually perpetuate linguistic imperialism, right? And I said no, right? Because my answer would be similar to that question, right? And this question, does it mean translanguaging will boost localization? The answer is yes. Okay, it's not going to perpetuate linguistic imperialism, but in fact, it will boost globalization. And by globalization, in this case, that means it will provide more opportunities for people to use different varieties from national languages, from indigenous languages, or maybe different dialects, to be involved all at once in translanguaging, so that in the future we'll have more varieties of English. So what we have as word English is in the future will flourish even more because of translanguaging. And in my view, I think what we have as Malaysian English and then Thai English and Japanese English, these are basically translanguaging that was happening, 20 or 30 years ago, right? So 20 or 30 years ago, people mix different varieties of Mandarin, of Japanese, of Korean with English and so on. And then after several years, they have become an normatively stabilized, they have become fixed, so they have become a new variety. So that's why we call them Japanese English, Korean English, Malaysian English, Philippines English, and so on. Okay, if we do that in Indonesia, then yes, right? Are we going to have Indonesian English? I don't think so. There are some scholars that have proposed the idea of Indonesian English, but Professor Fuad Abdul Hamid and I, and we have discussed this with a few other scholars, we disagree with that. I think what we are going to have is different varieties of English depending of Indonesian speakers' first language. So in other words, what we are going to have is something like Javanese English, so Indonesian speakers having Javanese language as their first language, and they try to involve English. And if you want to see evidence for that, then have a look at the research of Professor Lauren Zentz. Professor Lauren Zentz from University of Houston. She has done research on the use of Javanese, English, right, and Indonesian. And by Javanese here is not the kind of Javanese that I'll be using in Tagalog. I speak Javanese and with the Tagalog dialect. But if I have to speak with people in Salatiga, the Salatiga Javanese, that's a different Javanese because we are two different dialects, okay? So for that reason, then, we have linguistic varieties, if they become stabilized, then we have linguistic varieties that are influenced by many different linguistic varieties at the grassroots levels, right? Indonesian, English, and one or two indigenous languages mix and switch all together. So that's the answer to Ibu Yanti.
Okay, so it's more complicated. It's not Indonesian English, but it's Javanglish or Balinglish,
Yes,
perhaps.
I think so. I think so because I don't think we have a native speakers of Indonesian yet. I mean, if we say that, do we have native speakers of Indonesian? Indonesian is not a linguistic variety in itself. It is more like it is more like a heteroglossia, because we have so many different varieties of Indonesian, just in one entity that is called Bahasa Indonesia. So that's one. Okay, Ibu Winda, the next one.
All right, so I think Winda is just giving a comment, not a question.
Is it different from bilingual
Yeah,
education?
it's translanguaging different from bilingual.
Okay. Well, translanguaging in the first place was implemented in bilingual education context in Wales, right? So is it different from bilingual education? Translanguaging is an ideology. It is also a policy, and it is also a pedagogy, right? Bilingual education is not a policy, right? Per se, it is not an ideology per se. It is an educational context. So that's why translanguaging is a pedagogy that can be implemented in different classroom contexts. So bilingual education as one educational context, EYL, English for Young Learners, as an educational context, CLIL, Content Language Integrated Learning, as another context, EMI, English as a medium of instruction, right, as another context. These are all different contexts in which translanguaging can be implemented. Okay, that's the only difference between them, right? It's not because they are two different contexts. No, it's because one is pedagogy, which is also a language policy, which is also an ideology, but it can be implemented as pedagogy in bilingual education as an educational context. Okay, the next one, Ibu Nisa.
All right, Ibu Nisa, how if our student cannot catch our explanation? What can we do for the solution?
Okay,
I think
this is a very common issue among teachers around the world. They say that, okay, if I use English, my students don't understand. If I explain it to the students, my students don't understand. That's why I have to switch. I have to use Indonesian most of the time. That's why I have to use Japanese most of the time. Well, that's not the reason. That's a lazy explanation. All right. The reason why the students do not understand is not entirely because of their level of English, but it's the level of your English that's not scaffolded enough. If you scaffold it enough, then you can actually use 90 to 95% of your teaching in English to grade 1 of primary school students, right? I've done that, and a few of my students have also done that, and a few of my colleagues have also done that. We use nearly 90% of the classroom discourse in the classroom, right, in English rather than Indonesian. I myself, 95% to 100% in English entirely, right, without using Indonesian in most of my lessons when I was a primary school teacher, right? And I did that to grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 of primary school students. So if we can scaffold our English to levels that are appropriate to them, right, then this will be understandable. So that's why we need to look back at our own instruction. We need to reflect on ourselves. We need to think, okay, is this level of English understandable enough? Is it easy enough to be understood? Or is it still too difficult? Is my sentences enough, right? Short enough, or are they too long, right? Are my sentences long enough, or are they too long? And do I use different vocabulary or vocabulary that my students don't understand, and so on? Think about all these questions. There's a good book that you may be interested in reading, and that's called Classroom Discourse for Teacher Professional Development by Professor Steve Walsh, right? We haven't done much research to see the connection between classroom discourse on the one hand and translanguaging, and I'm trying to work on this in my own research. But if you look at it carefully, then you can see that actually what we need is for teachers to understand how and to what extent they can use English appropriately in the classroom to the level that is understandable to the students. So the first solution would be for you to reflect on your own practice, right? That's the first solution. After you answer all those questions in the reflection, then think about the translanguaging, how can you use Indonesian? How can you incorporate some Javanese, some Sundanese, with Cianjur dialect, or maybe with the Bandung dialect, or maybe with the Garut dialect, all together into your instruction. So when you formulate all of this, then you can work successfully. So my advice would be work on a journal where you can have this reflection and do this, with different questions, set up all the questions, answer them yourself, and then after that, try to implement them one by one, from the top, from your own reflection up to the way you use translanguaging in the classroom. The next one is Ibu Linda.
All right, Pak Subhan, I think this will be the last questions to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Ibu Linda. Is it okay if we want to ask our students to speak in English, but they cannot speak up? And finally, I scaffold them by writing and they speak by using their writing. Is there any idea to make their spoken ability more natural?
Okay, the idea for that, yes, it's okay. It's a strategy. It could work. It could work. It may not work. It all depends on the context. So if you want to try that, and I myself have done this in my teaching, in the Indonesian context, as well as in the Australian context when I was teaching English to international students. In some situations, in one situation, it did not work, right? Probably there was something wrong in my presentation at that time as I was reflecting on it. But in most contexts, in most teaching situations, it did work. So if the question is it okay? Then the answer is yes, right? How do you make it more natural? How do you make it more fluent? Try the speaking fluency gradation level. Okay, that's a pedagogical strategy. I don't know whether you have heard about it, but this idea comes from the process of you get students to read script. Okay, so in this script there are sentences of various length, right? Of various lengths. So there are sentences with 5 words, other sentences with 7 words, other sentences with 10 words, 15 words, and 20 words. And then they need to memorize these words, okay? So 5 sentences with different lengths. And then after that, they have to say all of them, let's say, in 50 seconds, right? That's one practice. The second one, you reduce the time from 50 seconds, make it 40 this time. After that, make it 30. After that, make it 20. Can they cope with that? So when they read the transcript, within a shorter period of time, that practice will give some opportunities, to the tongue, to pronounce different words, more fluently. I've done it myself as a language learner a long time ago. I did it. And I did this practice with my students. So I have words, I have sentences with different lengths, and then I ask students to practice saying them in different times. Students who usually have these problems, they come from China and Vietnam. The students in Vietnam, in particular, they are very good writers, but they cannot speak, very fluently. So when I work with these students, I gave them different words, right? Different sentences, and I got students to pronounce them, to produce these sentences at various time frames, in which in the beginning you have longer time, and at the end you have shorter time. So that will work out the fluency element. With the other questions, I'm happy to answer them. So if the conference organizer could collate all the questions all together and send them to my email, then I'll try to respond to them since we don't have time. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you benefit from it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Pak Subhan, we will summarize the questions and then send them to your email. Or perhaps you are willing to answer the questions on the chat box. That would be also welcome.
Okay, so while the other presenter, Ibu Nicke, is presenting, I answer the question in the QA box. Is that okay? All right, I'll do it.
Sure,
Okay,
Pak Subhan. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay, again, I want to take a moment to thank Pak Subhan for his valuable contributions, and surely we look forward to further enlightening discussion with you, Pak Subhan. Again, thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're going to proceed to the next presentation, Bapak Ibu. For the second panelist, we have Ibu Nicke. Before the presentation, please allow me to read Ibu Nicke's short bio. So Ibu Nicke Yunita Moecharam is an accomplished educator and researcher with a diverse background in the field of education, particularly focused on children's literature. She earned her Master of Arts in Children's Literature from Macquarie University in 2009, showcasing her commitment to the academic exploration of literature specifically tailored for young minds. Prior to her postgraduate studies, Bu Nicke obtained her Sarjana Pendidikan from Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia in 2004, laying the foundation for her educational expertise. Throughout her academic journey, she demonstrated a keen interest in fostering innovative pedagogical approaches with a focus on socio-linguistic in education, multiliteracy pedagogy, and multimodal pedagogy. Ibu Nicke's research interests reflect her dedication to advancing the understanding of language, literature, and education. Her expertise spans sociolinguistics in educational contexts, emphasizing the importance of language and social factors in the learning process. And additionally, her work delves into the realms of multiliteracy and multimodal pedagogy, showcasing a commitment to exploring diverse and dynamic teaching methodologies. Very long. It's not short bio, yeah, Bu Nicke, long bio. So without further ado, let's welcome Ibu Nicke to deliver the presentation. Please, Ibu Nicke.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Diah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Altin and British Council, for having me. We were blown away by what Subhan had presented to us. Basically, I feel like I'm learning all over again, looking at how these theories of psycholinguistic, neurolinguistics, and all of these practices that's basically had been around us for so long as teachers of English, but we come across this grounded research which Pa Subhan had conducted with his colleagues, and also looking at how everything works together. We come across this new understanding of what is it exactly. Translanguaging, code switching, code mixing, and all of the practices. And as you can see, how participant tried to get into all of the participant question. All questions have basically been addressed in a very well and informed research-based practices. So kind of makes me wonder, what do I have left to say? However, but I'm here. I'm just gonna try to share some of my point of view, supported with the resources that British Council have provided. Okay, allow me to share screen. We basically have covered everything from Pa Subhan's presentation. I'm just going to go through a bit about. I've joined the WhatsApp group discussion to see how everybody have the same understanding of what is translanguaging. I understand that people will have different point of view when they heard translanguaging. As you can see from the question raised after Pa Subhan's presentation, code switching, code mixing, all of these are familiar with us, especially during our time studying English at a university. When you learn sociolinguistic, you basically will come across code switching, code mixing, and we understand it that way. But it turns out to be something that's actually goes in deeper into other practices. And translanguaging is basically like a paradigm in a way that's more grounded into what I really appreciate as a part of empowering language speakers all around the world. That's why last night we tried to. So this is what I'm basically going to do. A very simple one. This is what we did last night with the WhatsApp group, with the community of practice. Actually there were 260 participants, around 250 participants in the WhatsApp group, and then we tried to identify how many are teachers of primary, secondary, primary and secondary schools, and how many are there are teacher educators. 80 respondents gave their response, and then I was kind of wondering about the types of strategy and how often do they frequently switch between languages when they are working with students and student teacher. Of the 80 respondents, I gave in 25% said that they strongly agree that they need to switch between languages when they're working with their students. A high percentage of 63.7% said that they agree to frequently switch between. So when you reflect back to what Pa Subhan had delivered, and the questions that you all have shared with Pa Subhan, is basically this reflect the practices that you did with your student in the classroom. And then the next question. In your current role as teacher educator, you often work with students who switch languages in the classroom, and basically everybody, all teachers are quite aware of what was happening in the classroom. Um, almost half of you seen this as some potential in the classroom, or almost 45.1% that you are aware of it, or 2% of you probably, yeah, I'm aware of that. But some students can switch languages, other students may not. But I think these are data which, what Pasuban had said, if you want to reflect to this fact that these are the realities you did in the classroom, and we often just pass it out like something that's normalized situation. However, behind that, we no longer can normalize that situation. We see that as a potential, including to reflect back on how your practices of translanguaging, how you need to be judicious, just like what Subhan said about your strategy. You need to have that awareness of when should I translanguage. It's very interesting. I, I I think that's a very good term. We're looking forward to Pa Subhan next work at the Translanguaging Continuum, is it? Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. That's going to be
Yes,
a
it's
very
correct. Translanguaging Continuum.
Continuum, yes, that's going to be a very interesting project. All right, some basic things which I think everybody, again, I try to draw everybody's awareness on what multilingualism is. As you can see there, I took this from a very basic encyclopedia, very neutral grounding, the ability of societies, institution groups, and individuals to engage on regular basis more than one languages in their day-to-day lives. Very common. Bilingualism refer to the coexistence. It's something you can read there by yourself. This one, I think I took it from Pilia Garcia when in her presentation, quote, the use of the translanguaging is the use of children's full linguistic repertoire to make meaning without thinking the fact that they have one language that is different from the other. So when I like the way she presented this definition as a part of, again, I saw some of the question and answer, the mindset of Indonesian teachers, most of Indonesian teacher where student needs to be held, or any learning in an English classroom needs to be held in this monolingual condition, disregarding the fact that the students and the children in the TEYL context have their own language, their home language, their local language, and perhaps due to other condition, to the demand of the curriculum, whether they're using Indonesian or Western curriculum, Cambridge, or what else, Oxford, perhaps, yeah, whatever is available, in a ways submit to the monolingual situation where students cannot own their home language for the time being that they're in the classroom. But whether the teacher realizes it or not, it somehow perhaps would influence how children develop outside of the classroom when they're not using the language. A question mark, a translingual term. This is something that Pak Subhan has also remarked earlier. Do we need this term? Realizing that we are in this situation, taken from Hirsu Zacharias, and they cited Horner. Basically, when we are aware of the situation, that's the keyword that I'm proposing in the chat group last night. The awareness, I think, is the point where we will be aware. And again, by taking a translingual turn, is how when teacher approach the context of language. Pak Subhan talks about the context as well, and I think that's another keyword of how we need to recognize the situation. And again, there's a lot of related terminologies. Again, like translinguism, translingual practice, all of these experts. I think the research are available if you want to have a look at the readings and the research. And then, however, in Leung and Volge's view in 2019, the translingual, the word trans is very popular. I'm not gonna say trans. I'm going to say the full word. Translingual turn is a part of a larger ecology of more general terms that, again, transnational, transcultural, translocal, transspatial, transmodal. What Pak Subhan had mentioned about multimodality, one of my research interests as well. And I agree that in the practice of or when you have this multimodality as a tool to work with translanguagism, we could. I took an example of Pak Subhan had plenty of research. I'm just going to take on my own example with my children when they are exposed to this technology of all different modes. And I think if you are here, if you are a teacher, you're a mother or a parent, basically, and kids nowadays, they cannot be separated with technology. But as they do learn, they're what is it? They are exposed to this audio, to this visual, to the sound, to the oral, to the gestures and everything, and they pick up those languages and make them their own without realizing that it's another language. Maybe we as teacher make it like sounds like that. In more, I think if you want to have something viral recently, I think everybody aware of how the kasir Indomaret, yeah, I think it's around yang bisa bahasa Jepang mungkin ya, picking up the Japanese language, picking up the gesture, picking up everything only by learning from watching anime, and somehow impress a real Japanese speaker by speaking, by the gesture and everything. It doesn't. It's what's more interesting is the impression that these the cashier, this person has learned the language naturally from watching anime instead of going onto language courses. Can we imagine that, having the access to learning a language on the palm of your hand, on your bedroom, in your bedroom, when you're just laying around in your bedroom, and that's basically something that we need to be aware of. I think everybody is aware of that as well. And then, however, what's interesting here is to see how the translingual turn scene. But I think, again, Subhan probably had research about this. What happens with teacher when they encounter the term for the first time? I think the questions that we have in the question and answer session had reflect this. What sort of transformation does the translanguaging enable teachers to go through in their understanding of what languages are and how they should be taught? And I think this, again, going to the basic of how do we as teacher able to reflect to ourselves, not just looking for some lazy reasons ya tadi yang Pak Subhan address juga. To what extent can we a teacher stand outside translingual paradigms? All very interesting part of the discussion. So the success of a translingual turn is in the hand of those who will carry it forward in the classroom, in their daily activities, and the metaphors of translanguaging that they employ to make sense of their practice. This again will possibly be done in a classroom where teachers have this awareness, where teachers are able to reflect to themselves and their practices. So what happened with their students, what potential that the students have, what sort of linguistic diversity, culture diversity that the students and the whole multilingual community reflect. I think we can, okay, something that I picked up from the, again, Pak Subhan, I'd probably pick on this as well. Why is it important? The question why, I think all of us need to, most of us depart from, why do we have to choose this? We already like be comfortable with the monolingual type of classroom that's highly encouraged in the curriculum of the country or any curriculum adopted in schools. A notion cited in Rashid and Capstick a webinar taken from Garcia and Wei. By translanguaging, all knowledge is valued because students and teacher would care for each other as people and co-learners, and they will develop trust, and they can learn from one another when these important point of how they can share power among the co-learners. And um, most of the learners probably you're not aware they have the potential, that they have the power to negotiate their linguistic diversity in the classroom or in the practices that usually one of the things that I really am interested with the concept of translanguaging is the shared power among co-learners. We empower the students. I think in the chat discussion also we pick up on this activity when teacher and learner can share and be more bonded in a way that they practice translanguaging in the classroom. And also have the opportunity to grow their social and individual identity, to have this what is it, a room, a community of practice, which in the end will give out a real world engagement. So if you're afraid of the end result of whether translanguaging is going to hinder students, whatever level you're working with, to develop their second or third language or fourth language, well, actually, with again judicious strategy, with the what is it, with the proper scaffolding and etc., you shouldn't be afraid of that. It turns out that you will have a very authentic world engagement. The CLIL was so what is it that this phenomena of being in multilingual situation in a bilingual classroom education. Pak Subhan had mentioned a context CLIL, and probably most of you here have heard about it as well. The CLIL teaching, I took this as perhaps, if you want to say, like a best practices of translanguaging pedagogy, how CLIL teaching is used in multilingual primary education settings. But why do we need to do that? Because again, the awareness of how children now increasingly acquiring school knowledge in a second or even a third language. My children is in a bilingual classroom and they need to be able to work with math and science taught in English. So CLIL would be one of the methodology to facilitate the integration of the content, which is math and science, and the English language, which I think could be, again, one of the contexts to work with in bilingual education. This is taken from a resource in British Council. To be a teacher with the knowledge of CLIL, they need to be aware of, again, a very reflective process of how a teacher ideally would be aware of what, who, when, and how the CLIL could in a way took part or be one of the best practices. What is it? You need to decide the aspect of language to focus on any stem from a thorough understanding of the linguistic foundation underlying effective content lessons. Who is it? Knowing who you have in your classroom. Again, not for lazy reasons. Yeah, was found to be a particular concern to your to us, yes, primary teacher tended to enter profession because they were interested in the whole child development rather than the subject teaching per se. So most of the students that I've worked with, particularly when I teach children's literature, they're interested in, or I think I've teach TYL courses a few years back, and the reason why they want to be a teacher, I think, because most of them said, I like children, I like working with children, but they haven't got involved into understanding what they will be teaching, the subject, not just caring for how the child develops. And this was found also in at UPI with the with teachers from early childhood education. Basically, they work with. I like working with children. It's fun to be in a classroom full of children. But as they were appointed to be bilingual homeroom teachers, they were confused. How am I supposed to teach science and math in English? I don't even have any knowledge about this. But again, CLIL would be one of the contexts to deal with. As you can see here, when you can see that the curricular goals for the contextual factor and then the teacher situation integration knowledge. When should teacher have this clear approach or context? You can pay attention. You can pay your attention to the curricular goals for the content and language, where the teacher will decide when to focus on language, on the centrality of specific language skills, the local curricula, alongside with the linguistic diversity in local classroom. Again, everything's been covered by Subhan. Be judicious in this case, is technically being aware to focus on what the linguistic diversity available in the classroom. And then Pasuban also mentioned the age-appropriate curricular expectation. Again, with the translingual continuum, younger primary students probably will not be needing that too much of translanguaging. And this is something that's will require some practice and thorough research to deal with. Yeah. And then when the teacher are very much aware of the linguistic diversity, the teacher can decide when to use the learners first or home language based on the language pairing options. Yeah, it's not about questions or whether you want to put in 20% of Indonesian, 80% of English. Would still be the case in most of the classroom in Indonesia, but you can again be aware of how additional language learners obtain language knowledge from their environment. What did the student did when they're not in the classroom, or they're exposed to this multimodal situation? Do they have access to social media? Do they have access to all of this YouTube channel or TikTok or anything that's available for them, or even more suited contexts such as the webtoons? Yeah, if you are familiar with webtoons and etc., most of our students, Discord, they can learn everything on Discord. And then some other things, the contextual factor, teacher's own language and Subhan, how far do we reflect to ourselves when we, what sort of resources do we have as teachers? And then teacher also, in some cases, lucky ones, perhaps you'll have some learning support opportunities when English features in learners' home language is used, and then the extent of learners' exposure to English outside of school, yeah, through technology and media. And then the how is basically informed by the three pillars: the language teaching for learner participation to increase learner opportunities, to participate safely and fully in the learning process. Most of us probably didn't realize that when students are forced into this situation of monolingualism, that they don't feel safe. That's perhaps that's when teacher complains about speaking anxiety or science anxiety or math anxiety. Well, they probably didn't have this fully safe environment to express themselves in this linguistic repertoire that they have. Uh, Again, I think we can expand this to the notion of social justice in the classroom. Translanguaging could be one of the strategy, if I could say, to lessen this type of. Actually, I think it was from my discussion with a colleague. It was um, with today's relational pedagogy approach, we can no longer say that a student should have speaking anxiety or science anxiety or math anxiety, because that will be in a way shaming them in the classroom. And I think translanguaging could be one of the a strategy to deal with this type of labeling that teacher do in the classroom, because of the feeling of unsafety when teachers express themselves in one language aside from other languages. And the language teaching for knowledge articulation to ensure the learners receive sufficient opportunities to be exposed to. These are all very theoretical. I think Pasuban has also covered in more practical and technical expression. Okay, the language teaching for learner progression to address the need for learners to progress in line with both child-specific and year group appropriate expectation. So where did the CLEAD would direct the bilingual education to? These 2 points that I have highlighted from the sources is that while substantial knowledge and skill in the use of multilingual approaches was found among our teachers, particular challenges remained in understanding how to balance the content and the language for the optimal learning for both content and the additional language. And I think this opens up wide opportunity for further research, particularly conducted in Indonesian classrooms in bilingual educations. Some more research is needed because both by teachers or with teachers to understand what sort of multilingual strategies necessary to facilitate not only for the learning of the content, but specifically for the learning of, not for, but of the content and the language. So if you're a teacher education, this is a call for you. You can have your research conducted within this area. So translanguaging, what's in it for teacher educators, specifically focus on teacher educator here, not without disrespect to fellow teachers. You can use these resources, very useful resources from the British Council, looking at this is a book. I think it consists of 158 pages or something. But what I get from the book is that it provides inside recommendation for teachers, educators, specifically where translanguaging puts the children at their ease, and be aware of how students are empowered to have to be themselves, to negotiate within their own space, indicating that the language that they bring from home is valued in school and classroom. This is completely perhaps the opposite to what the monolingual situation is. And then translanguaging allows students to draw upon the entire linguistic repertoire that usually spans more than one language. And then freedom of movement across languages actually turns out that it should enable the child or to become a better communicator as they pick and choose words from different languages. They put intuitively to put a sentence together. This example is taken from my own children as they grew up mainly in multilingual situation. And sometimes we pick up if they want to express things in, they will pick up, like my daughter, she would understand the concept of math as she was exposed to this program, number blocks. Her understanding of numbers, whether they are square, or this was all built up with how the number blocks, she was exposed to this number blocks concept. So when she asked me numbers, for example, Mom, is 6 a square or a rectangle? Saya nggak tahu apa ya, square apa rectangle, because what do you mean? Then dia baru, karena dia mengerti dengan konsep bahwa it's a square, Mom, it's a square. When you, unfortunately, even though she went to a bilingual classroom, as she get into the classroom and the teacher taught her this math concept, she didn't understand, because it was a completely different part of what she had adopted during her study with her number block characters in this. It's a cartoon show, but I think in local Indonesia you can watch it in Mentari TV, but was it translated or not? I'm not sure, but it's a very great concept if you're a teacher working with students of early childhood and you want to teach them math in English. It's a very good concept. If you please excuse me. And then in an English classroom, it's important to create a safe space for children to speak English. This is something that we probably are most concerned of. Part of our childhood trauma, perhaps when we learn English, when we were exposed to English, when we were in senior, junior high school. Back then at my time, it was quite depressing to see or to learn or to be in an English classroom because your teacher is going to yell at you and you don't make the right grammar pronunciation, or you need to adopt this English accent, British accent, or American accent if you want to talk like Adele or whatever. Surprisingly, I think even in today's context, we still find students applying for a LPDP scholarship, and they still are dwelling with the type of question for their research about, do you want to adopt the British accent or the American accent? I think this is some sort of a very strong impact of how students or Indonesian students are aware of this. I'm really sorry. Of how their teacher probably have some sort of influence towards, you need to adopt this accent, you need to adopt this action, or in pronunciation lesson, you need to do this, you need to do that. In fact, later on, just like Pak Subhan said, we probably will come up with Sundanese English. We probably will come up with, somebody's mentioned about Dayak English in the chat box, or Javanese English, Javanese with the Gal English and everything. And it's completely fine. I think that's what we need to instill in our mind, that it's fine to make mistakes. So as I go through the book, I found several key principles. The first principle, as you can probably see here, excuse me, Ibu Diah, do I still have time?
You have 2 minutes left, Bu Nicke.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through here. You can read it yourself. These 4 principles, actually there are 6 principles. The principle has implication for education system. So if you worry about how the curriculum would work, how the government with the changing curriculum would probably have another curriculum shift after 2024 presidential election, etc. But basically, if you pay attention to those principles, it will have implication for education systems, including teacher educators, professional development, including decision makers and parents. We need to see this, that parents have voice, certainly, because they need to decide which education is better on behalf of their children. And the book also provides some sort of guidance for teacher educators in terms that it builds teacher awareness, building the learners' awareness, encouraging learners to reflect on their learning process and making purposeful use of code switching, translation, and translanguaging. And these are the references, and I put in the sources from British Council, which I think it's quite convenient to read if you want to go through a lot of if you want to learn translanguaging, if you want to learn what multilingual and the practices, the best practices that we basically could find and apply it in our classroom. I think that is my setting session. Thank you very much. Back to Ibu Diah.
Thank you very much, Monica. Another insightful sharing from Monica about translanguaging. And I think we have got a question here. Monica, can we start answering the question? It's from Pak Asep Rahmat. Okay. Monica, sometimes we always want to be perfect in expressing the expression, both in structure and meaning. So what about translanguage itself in English classroom? Monica, you can start answering.
Right. Sorry, Pasep is.
You're still mute there.
Is it? Am I still? Hello.
Yes.
Am I
okay.
audible?
Now
Hello? Yeah,
we can
right.
hear you.
Okay. Right. We always want to be perfect. Of course, we want to be perfect. We want to sound perfect. But how again? Can you not be perfect with translanguaging? Perfect in a way of expressing yourself. You are. Why can't? I'm just going to go back to Pasep again and with another question. Why cannot we be perfect in expressing ourselves when we translanguage? Perhaps that's a question to everybody can think of. Why can't we not be perfect in expressing any expression when we translanguage? As you can see from the example of what Subhan had shown from his research back in 2018, I think Miss Rosa and her students exchanging conversation completely perfect. And I think we can reflect on that as well. You can still be perfect in expressing yourself in translanguaging, but cannot be perfect in expressing yourself. That's I think that's a question I think we need to all to think about again. Why the fear of not being fully expressing ourselves when we translanguage? Why? Mungkin Bapak Ibu, I'm gonna translate. I'm gonna switch into some examples. I see a lot of example in my social media feed when a meme ya, mungkin Ibu dan Bapak pernah lihat ada meme Adele ngomong bahasa Inggrisnya itu kayak gitu ya. I mean, isn't it perfect? Perkara kita ngerti apa enggak kan itu mah apa yang tadi dialeknya emang kayak gitu ya. Tapi kenapa enggak dibilang perfect gitu? Mungkin itu ya, maksudnya I just like to go back to us thinking about why cannot be perfect in that part. Mungkin itu ya, Pak Sep, you're my neighbor. Maybe I can visit you at SMP 3 Lembang one day. Ya, Pak Sep. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Monica. I think yes, and it's interesting, Monica, to know that the schools nowadays teach other subject in English, especially in bilingual and international school, just like you experience with your children. Okay, so
Yes.
Is it the time or translanguaging becomes trans because of that as well?
I think it's about time that we are more aware of the potential and how that could reach a lot of possibilities. So I think a lot of questions we thought we were worried about. Jadi gimana ya anaknya bakalan bisa nggak? Jadi gimana ya nanti kurikulumnya kayak gimana? Gimana kalau kita nggak bisa? I think with very grounded research, for example, just like what Pak Subhan did, we can tackle all of those questions and come with a very new mindset, possibilities of maybe we can thrive as speakers of second language, third language, fourth language, in that part. I think we need to just open up our mind to see this potential. And I think most of the teacher educators and also teachers of primary and secondary school here in this community also start to open their mind that this possibility should, that worries are okay, fears are okay, but you have all the research, you have all the facts, you have all the practice. You are offered with this best practices, this context of so many different things. In fact, I think was it last week when we talked about the potential of ESPs. Was it from, I forgot which was from last week. I joined in the WhatsApp group, and then the people talking about kalau pakai vocational school kayak gimana gitu ya untuk, and I think yeah, I think to be aware of how EMI could be the context of that in vocational school dan yang lain sebagainya. You can start thinking about that. The paradigms have shifted, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Nicke, some teachers insist of using full English, yeah, in their in their English class, especially in English to young learners classes. So, in order to give more exposures to them, to the students. So, how do you respond to this case? Should we insist on using English all the time?
I picked
in order
this
to
up,
give
and
more
I think
exposure?
and I think Pa Subhan had already mentioned that with the strategy of when you recognize your students, do they need this type of fully English? I think Pa Subhan had mentioned it. This is something that he had done. He had taught in first grade, is it first grade, second grade, and fully English, no problem. And then as they go on the upper level, probably don't need that much of translanguaging. And I think that's very, very interesting to work with. There you have the research, right? There you have the practice. So I think it's about time that most of the time the problem is in ourselves. We are not sure of whether nanti anaknya nggak bisa ya kalau nggak fully English, nanti kalau ini kayak gimana gitu ya. Dan I think it's apa namanya, it's something that okay, this is a paradigm shift, we need to try it. I really like the term lazy reason tadi ya. Jangan kitanya aja gitu agak rebahan, agak lazy reason gitu ya untuk to be to step out of our comfort zone. This is what I know, and this I'm going to stick with it. Probably it's no longer going to be that way in a few years ahead. Outside of the classroom, whether we realize it or not, especially in big cities or in small cities. In Jakarta, we have the variation of Jaksel, nanti ada Jaksel English, and etc. And I think we need to be aware of that too. Teachers should be aware of that too.
I agree with you.
Can I add something to Ibu Nicke's statement?
Sure,
Okay.
Pa Subhan.
Sorry, Ibu Nicke.
Yeah.
I think because you mentioned my explanation earlier, I think it reminds me of it reminds me of my discussion with a colleague of mine who is we used to study together at University of Canberra when we were doing TESOL, masters in TESOL, and now she's at Universitas Sumatera Utara, and we were talking about this lazy reason kind of thing, and it comes up to my mind that probably this is part of the rebahan pedagogy.
Yeah. Yes. I think
I don't know. I mean, it's because it's just so prevalent, you know. I mean, I have found this, you know, in the context of, you know, teachers in West Java, teachers in Central Java, East Java, in Bali, in Medan, Sumatra, in Brazil, Colombia, you know, places that I've been to, you know, they say, you know, this thing, you know, it's prevalent, it's everywhere, but upon reflection, it's part of our self, as a teacher who needs to learn more, who needs to reflect more, and who needs to be aware of different classroom incidents, who it is us who need to what is it to perpetually learn. I think that's to sum up, our role as a teacher, right? A good teacher is a perpetual learner, so that's why we need to leave behind, the rebahan pedagogy. So short comment, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor. Yes, I
Please
think that's
carry
really,
on.
it is
Thank
very
you.
prevalent. Yeah. Yep. I agree. I couldn't agree more. That's just, sometimes it's just like, it's just so, for me, it's like, it's whenever there's this, I think it's a pedagogy, probably it's a mindset as well. It's so difficult to encounter, to counter with that kind of mindset, is that aku nggak bisa kayak gini, udah aku tuh emang kayak gini. That kind of mindset, gemes ya kayak nggak. So it's just like, yes, we'll have those kind of difficulties. There's nothing comes easy for us when you go into a classroom and you meet this challenges, this obstacles in your classroom, whatever that might be. Everything just go back to how our mindset is going to deal with that part of challenges. Are we going to, aku kayaknya mau kayak gini aja deh, aku mau stucknya kayak gini aja, aku nggak mau, but then that's why we have the community of practice. That's why we are here today. We are going to share some of the possible approaches, or some new research or best practices that's based on research that are very grounded in some accessible resources. And I think from the one that's provided by British Council is very useful. It has very, if you like to see how they have simple best practices, particularly when you want to put in context of TYL, you can read it very easily, and it's there. It tackles all of your questions. It tackles all of the things that probably becomes an obstacle in your teaching, or how to deal with students, how to even question ourselves for professional development and such.
All right, thank you, Bunika. I think we can refer to last week webinar by Pa Willy. It's about open-minded or narrow-minded. Okay, so it's rebahan pedagogy.
Yeah, growth mindset and fixed mindset.
Yeah,
It's just like it's.
Okay, so I think thank you very much, Bunika, for your insightful sharing today. And please allow me to conclude today's webinar from Pak Subhan and also Bunika, that it's quite interesting to point out that translation is not translanguaging. They have different concept of pedagogical practices. And Pak Subhan and Bunika also have given some examples of cases where we thought they are translanguaging practices, but actually they're not. We need to think about how to use translanguaging even since planning the lessons and implement them for classroom management, for example, or explaining concept, or repairing something. And it's been very invaluable to have Pak Subhan and Bunika to share the knowledge today. Again, thank you very much, and hope we can have further discussion about translanguaging. Thank you, Pak Subhan, and also Bunika, for sharing today.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Pak Subhan, Ibu Diah, Ibu Jusnita, Dimas, and everybody. Thank you. I'll see you on the community practice.
Yes.
WhatsApp group.
Okay. Thank you. I will give it back to MC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again to our remarkable speakers, Bapak Subhan Zein, Ph.D., and Ibu Nicke Yunita Moecharam, MA, for the ideas and fruitful insights into translanguaging in teaching English to young learners. A warm thank you is also extended to Dr. Diah Royani Meisani for chairing the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, as informed earlier, this webinar is the first of 3 webinars from the second strand, and lots have happened in the 3 events of the first strand, embracing the topic of understanding the educational context. A sincere thank you is extended to over 300 participants taking part in the first strand of the event. You can check out the previous webinars on the British Council Indonesia's YouTube page. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to remind you of some information about what is happening in January from the British Council. Allow me to share my screen. The first information is the 6-month self-study course about how to teach vocabulary. It is lasting for 3 months. It consists of 3 modules. This course will help your learners notice, record, recycle, and use new vocabulary more confidently with engaging classroom activities. The link to registration is provided in the chat box. Another event also taking place in January is the 3-month self-study course about how to teach grammar consisting of 3 modules. If you are interested in discovering how to help your learners notice, make sense of, and become more confident using grammar with engaging, meaning-focused teaching, learn about deductive and inductive approaches to grammar teaching, how to evaluate the best approach for young learners, and identify contexts and tasks with encouraged noticing. The link to registration is also provided in the chat box. To all participants, please submit your feedback through this link, which you can scan the barcode, and our team will send it to the chat box. The feedback link also serves as your attendance checker. If you are also interested in becoming a Peltin member, our team will send the registration link to the chat box. Ladies and gentlemen, don't miss out our second webinar of the first strand that will be held next week on Saturday, February the 3rd, 2024. The second webinar is entitled Current and Future Challenges in Language Education. Dr. Gumawang Jati from Institut Teknologi Bandung and Ibu Yusnita Febrianti Ph.D. from Universitas Negeri Malang and the first Vice President of Peltin are the speakers of the opening of the upcoming webinar. To watch the previous webinars, please access the following link that will be shared by our team. We would also like to inform the anticipated Peltin Conference 2024. This year's conference is in conjunction with the first UICELE or UNPAC International Conference on English Language Education and the second Peltin Conference. This conference will be held at Universitas Pakuan Bogor, Indonesia on Saturday, July the 13th, 2024. Embracing the theme of supporting EYL teachers through knowledge and best practice, we have prestigious lineup of speakers. Dr. Iche Hodijah as the keynote speaker. The plenary speakers are Professor Pauline Jones, Ph.D. from the University of Wollongong, Australia, Dr. Alexius Chia from the National Institute of Education, Singapore, Ika Lestari Damayanti, MA, Ph.D. from Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, Ati Herawati, MPD from Universitas Pakuan, Indonesia, and Relo Expert, which is to be announced. More updates on the conference will be published on Peltin Instagram and website, alongside UNPAC FKIP Instagram and website. To obtain your certificates of this event, they will be distributed at the conclusion of our webinar series. This process allows us to accurately verify your attendance during the Zoom sessions. Your understanding and patience in this matter are greatly appreciated. If you have any further inquiries or require additional information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you for your cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to extend our huge thank you to over 140 participants joining today's webinar, and we are looking forward to the next discussion on the Community of Practice WhatsApp group dedicated to this event, and also to the next event on Saturday next week. I'm Dimas Pujianto, signing off. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.